Welcome back to It's Kind of a Big Deal. This is episode 4. I'm Jenna Horton.
And I'm Olivia Bondi.
And today we are talking about budgets. So last week we talked about side hustles, and that's going to kind of bring us into today's topic of budgets.
Which Jenna loves budgets. She's all jacked up on Mountain Dew about budgets.
I've been making notes all morning, so excited about budgets.
She's wearing the pants today, so she will guide us in our budget conversation.
Yeah. So I guess going back to last week, we were trying to understand side hustles, but like before knowing if a side hustle is something that you need, we need to understand our cost of living.
Yeah.
So I guess talking about budgets, it's not even just focusing on what you spend. I feel like there's a negative connotation towards budgeting.
I'm working on shaking that.
Yeah, we're working on it. But I feel like we need to focus also on what you're making, and that's where the side hustles come into this as well. So it doesn't have to be negative. It's just taking control of your finances, understanding where your money's going, and making a plan for that.
So I think, first we're going to talk about our homework for you guys, and kind of for me, it's going to be understanding what it currently costs you to live.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be long term, right? It's like, what does it cost me to live right now?
Today.
And then how can I fine tune that to get to somewhere where I'm not blowing the budget?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that would kind of start with knowing what your expenses are. I like to look at maybe the past 3 months and take a look at every dime that you've spent. I was doing it just before we started here for February, and looking at what you spent last month, every single penny, knowing where that money went.
And that's kind of the way, I guess I'll share, the way that I budget is looking more at an annual review of what I spend, sorting my credit card by
category,
and also by, I guess, like vendor.
Yes.
And then subcategorizing that into like where my money went to throughout the year.
Right.
I personally have never felt the pressure to have a budget because I think I've mentioned before, I'm really good with money and I'm really tight with the coin purse.
Right.
And I live well below my means.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think, seeing the way that you budget, maybe I should look into getting a budget just to be more
aware. And I think too, we can so easily spend our money just being mindless and just tapping a credit card. I'm like, tap, tap, taparoo is kind of my saying. And I'm like, I need to ease up on that a little bit. I think for me, it's the opposite. Like I have been good with my money, but it's something I have to work towards. And I saw my parents always trying to budget, always failing, but they were always trying to make this stride towards taking control of their money. And I just want to take that one step further and succeed with that.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So how do we get a budget?
Yeah, I guess. I think number one is knowing your goal. Like I was talking to you about this, that I don't think that you're going to stick to a budget. We can make this budget, understand what we're spending our money on, but if we don't have a goal or know our why, then we're not going to stick with it. So whether that is saving for your first home, saving to buy a car, looking to save for retirement, I think it all comes down to controlling your expenses, which then will end up working into your savings.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. So there's 5 basic elements to a budget, in my opinion. First would be your income. And so some examples of that would be
like your 9 to 5 or your main category of income, any investments that you have and any returns on that, any side hustles that you might have or extra income that you have coming in. Those are some.
Yeah, so knowing what you're making every single month, because that's probably where I would start.
Yep.
And then from there, your fixed expenses.
So some of your fixed expenses would be mortgages, utilities, gas, anything, life insurance.
Yeah.
Those are some examples of mine.
Property taxes. Yeah.
My gym, I probably would consider into a fixed expense.
Yes, and that kind of transitions into a conversation of gray area. So we were discussing this as like, it could be very much a gray area as to what is a necessary expense. And like we were talking about the car.
Yeah, like wants and needs. Like, there's some things that we're like, okay, even food.
Yes.
Is something that's like that, right? It's like
groceries. Do I need to shop at an expensive grocery store? Or can I shop at maybe a more middle class grocery store? Yeah. So I guess just like determining that middle line, or understanding maybe your income versus your expenses, and then seeing where you can stretch the budget a little bit. Like if food is very important to you and you want to eat an all organic diet or have sushi every single night, then maybe that's where you spend your money, but you save in other places.
Yeah, you got to skimp in the other place. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll circle back to the car. I think like we were talking about how in the town that we live in, a car is a need.
Yeah.
When I was buying a car, my mom wanted me to buy this gold, I think it was like a Chevy Cruze or something.
Right.
That was like parked in some old man's front yard. And me and her got in like maybe one of the biggest fights that we've gotten in to date over this, because she was like, I found the perfect car for you. And I was like, I'm not buying that car.
Right.
It would have filled my need, but it didn't fill my want. So I feel like personally, like the car that I drive has to fall into more of a want category than a need. But there's like, it's almost like a split. You know, like I could get a car for $20,000 and that would fall into my needs. And then anything over and above that kind of falls into a want category. And you have to budget accordingly for that.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's funny actually that you say that, because I remember when I was buying my first car and I was just on Kijiji every day, so excited to buy a car. And for some reason at the time, PT Cruisers were like, they were on sale everywhere in Kijiji.
I used to love PT Cruisers.
I never loved it, but they were so cheap. And so I was like, I'm going to get a PT Cruiser. My parents actually talked me out of it. They're bad with money. So I probably should have bought the PT Cruiser, but it ended up working out. My first car was like $300 and it was...
Wait, didn't you find money?
Yes, oh my God,
that's a great story.
Okay, true. So I bought this car for $300, a Volkswagen Jetta. At the time, it was a matching car to my boyfriend, so I thought it was so cute.
So embarrassing.
And then, I know. So then I went to pick up the car, and I was cleaning it out. This guy just left everything in there. I think I found a bucket system. I don't know if that's
full to the brim with trash.
No, trash, like a gym bag, everything. And then I found a Christmas card or a birthday card, I don't know which one, under the driver's seat. I apologize if this kid ever hears this story, but found a card under the seat and it says like, happy birthday, love grandma. $300 in the card.
Free car.
Like, I just paid $300 for this car and now I found this. There's probably like $20 worth of change too in the cup holders.
Yeah, you can't beat that.
I'm like, this is great.
I probably should have brought the Chevy Cruze. It would have probably had some
treasures.
Some treasures.
You never know.
Yeah, absolutely. Old men love cash.
Seriously. So yeah, I guess that's kind of just like the car can be a want and a need. We do need it because we have a lack of public transportation in our community, but we don't need the $1,000 car payment that comes with some vehicles.
Yeah, and I think like we'll kind of focus on, because it can be a little bit overwhelming, like right now is like, what does it cost for us to live? And then later on down the road, look at how we can fine tune that in every single category, right? Like whether that's food, car, even like as much as your house, right? Like, which is a big expense, but that's something that, you know, you don't necessarily have to buy a house that's $600,000 just because you're approved for $600,000. Like looking at your wants versus needs in those categories as well.
And goes back to living below your means.
Yeah,
I think that's a really good way to live your life.
Yeah, it's a great way to live your life, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not like using that leverage elsewhere, right? Like Erin and I are at a point right now where we're really kind of struggling with do we move and you know get ourselves into a home that's a little bit better than the one we're in now, or do we take that money and invest it into, you know, buying another investment property or buying like a commercial space or something that's going to turn us more income and be able to set us up better in the future.
Right, and then that's just making that decision of like, am I going to sacrifice where I'm living for the long-term return of what this other investment's going to do for me, and just like weighing those options, I think is really important.
And like looking at it, like I know right now it's hard and you might want that like fancy house, but it's like, you know, what's that going to do for me in the future, and what's that going to make my life look like in the next 20, 30 years?
Right, and that's in the intro to our podcast, we talk about your future self will thank you. So I think just like playing those options out.
Really got to remind myself of that.
Yes, just listen to the intro every day.
Yeah.
So yeah, after fixed expenses, we have our flexible expenses, which we've kind of started to touch on.
Yep.
But some examples of that would be...
Flexible expenses in my life would definitely be travel. Travel is something that's important to both of us. Some like easy things like for girls, like getting your nails done, getting your hair done.
Yep. Brows,
cosmetic things.
Yes.
You know, lots of those kinds of things. Even eating out.
Yeah, that's an absolutely flexible
It's
expense.
flexible and like to a certain extent.
Yeah, it's a
You know,
choice.
it's a choice. So those
Drinking.
Drinking. Oh yeah.
We'll have an episode on that to come, but yeah,
The hidden cost of alcohol.
it's a big one.
Yeah. We just got back from a trip, so.
Okay, so after unplanned expenses or flexible expenses, then will be debt.
Okay, debts. So looking at things like student loans, credit card debt, what other types of loans? Car loans. And then categorizing those into which ones are more expensive. Even, what was I buying? Oh, last night I bought a smoker at Home Depot.
You didn't even tell me this.
Yeah. I bought a smoker at Home Depot, and the girl was like, oh, today's the last day. Like, you can sign up for 24 months of no payments on a smoker. And I'm just like, why would I buy this smoker?
If you can't afford it.
If you can't afford it. You know what I mean? And then, like, why would I want to pay for this smoker in 2 years when I have this 2-year-old smoker that...
Yeah, and what is that smoker then going to cost you when you're adding the interest costs of that?
Yeah, and like I think it's so hard in this day and age where literally everywhere you go, there's like interest free. Like we just had a mortgage broker downstairs talking about how like over 20 times this year she had people when she pulled their credit reports that were in arrears with Teppermans, and the clients were like, I literally paid this off years ago, and it's like. Sometimes there's, you know, a miscommunication, a couple, like 1 or 2 missed payments, and you leave it over a long period of time. And if you're not checking your credit regularly, those like small things that you don't think about, you know, like when you go to Canadian Tire and open up a credit card.
It's just there.
Yeah, it's just there.
And I think too, when you have good credit, you don't think to check your credit. I think people who are building their credit or have low credit, they're periodically checking their credit because they're working towards a better credit score. So I think it is very simple to just let that go and you're not even thinking about it. Yeah, I think for myself, I always make sure I call when I make my last payment and I follow up and make sure the account's closed. Yeah. But that's also because I saw my parents struggle with that exact issue.
Right, exactly. Yeah, with all of these like small little things. And yeah, like the smoker was like $900.
Right.
It's not a huge amount of money, but you know, if you leave that $900 sitting there for 2 years and you forget about it, and then that starts to build up.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
Yeah. So that's debt, and then that kind of leads us into savings. So with that, we were discussing that prior to saving, we should make sure we're paying off our high interest debts. So then that leads us into savings.
Yeah, so savings, even last week I had someone text me and they were like, I want to buy a house, where should I be putting my money?
Right, in
so
the interim.
Like, in the interim. So making sure that you're connected with like the right people that can invest your money in the interim, and whether that's into a TFSA or the first time home buyers account. Yeah. Making sure that your money is in the right place, that it's going to work for you for the period that it's in there. And that looks different for different goals, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're saving long term and you don't think you need that money, if you have an emergency fund, sometimes you can have different accounts set up for different purposes. But making sure that there's always a piece of the pie left over to go into your savings. Because at the end of the day, that's how you know if you're really blowing the budget and living beyond your means, if you don't have any money left over.
For your future self.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that would be the 5 elements of a budget. So I guess what we were kind of talking about before is some homework would be to sit down and figure out what those 5 elements look like for you.
Yep.
And something you need to do.
Yes, that can start with, like writing down all of your expenses in a month, writing down all of your income in a month, and then if you're like, I know my money is going elsewhere, look at your credit card, look at your debit card, whatever you spend your money on, and kind of categorize that. A lot of our apps are really smart these days, depending on what credit card you have. It will kind of categorize it for you, so you can look and see like, oh, I'm really overspending in the eating out category. I'm really overspending in my subscriptions, whatever that looks like. Figure out where you're at right now with how much it costs you to live and how much money you have coming in, and then let's look at the difference between those two to see what can we do with this to go forward and fine-tune this and make this gap bigger.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, set some goals, whether that's to pay off debts or to save money. Yeah, getting our expenses in control for that. Yeah, so some different options for a budget once you have an idea of what everything is costing you, how much you're making, how much you're spending, and how much you want to be saving. So different types of budgets would be, I think one of the most common ones is the 50-30-20. And so that's 50% of your income is for your needs, those non-negotiables like we discussed. 30% is for your wants or your unplanned expenses, and then 20% is for your future self.
Yep.
I think that works well. You could probably adjust those categories if you needed to, or say you were only spending 30% on your needs, then maybe you give yourself a little more cushion in your wants, or you're preparing for the future a bit more and saving more there.
Yeah, and I think it's tough because like, let's say like you are spending like a lot of people in this day and age would be spending more than 50% of what they make on their living accommodations.
Right.
So it's like, you know, don't get discouraged if you look at that and you're like, oh, right off the hop, I'm already like off those ratios, right? Like you have to fine tune those ratios into what works for you and what's realistic.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Everyone needs a place to live. And I know that like rent and mortgages and all that stuff is super high. So it's hard to, you know, if you're just starting out to get within those means.
So I guess just like setting the percentages. And then I think too, you could kind of do this in the reverse of like, if you are looking to purchase a home, maybe you look at your expenses of what they could be if you bought for 600,000 or 500,000 or 400,000, whatever that looks like. And then seeing, okay, if I purchase for this, will my like fixed expenses be within that 50% goal that I have? And then that can kind of help you determine how much you want to spend on a house.
Yeah, and figuring out a budget that works for you.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Because you're not going to stick to anything. Just like we talked about with you know, having extra income. Like if it doesn't work for you, you're not going to stick to it. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a budget strategy that we say, and we will request. We will recommend a few more.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be one of those, but it has to be something that works for you and that you can stick to.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Because you're not going to use the tool.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Another option would be a budget to zero. So that's just like knowing where every dollar is going. Like every dollar has a purpose because we can make this income and then it just finds its way without being purposeful about your money. This is another one. It's kind of getting out of date. I remember when I was like younger, I had done this, and that would be like envelopes, and so that's just paying with cash. So it's much harder. Maybe this would be a good way to do your wants money. Because I feel like typically your bills are coming out of your accounts, coming off your credit card automatically. Like we're not paying cash for our mortgage. Like that's not realistic. But if you set a certain amount of money that you were able to spend on wants, whether that's eating out, your hair, your nails.
Yeah, mostly wants are things you're doing in person, I guess.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, like we were saying, our nail tech, he only takes cash. So I feel like that's something that you could do with cash. And so then it's much harder for you to break a $20 bill to buy your $5 coffee, or it's just harder to part with cash, I think.
Absolutely. You see it leaving.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to tap your credit card.
It's so much
Takes 2
easier.
seconds.
Or Apple Pay. Everything is just so simple. So maybe that's a good strategy to put into place for your wants.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah. One of our favorite strategies, we'll end with this, is pretending that we are broke.
Yeah, this is something that Jenna and I both use. So in our checkings account, or like our day-to-day account, where that's the account that we pay off our credit card from. That's the account that we pay our bills from. We keep that account. And that's the only account that I see. I don't know about you. That's the only account when I open up my banking that I see.
Because we would have our money invested elsewhere. So like that's our day-to-day banking.
Yeah, and maybe it's not even, for me, it's not even invested elsewhere.
It's just hiding.
It's like hiding in another account. But keeping that at like a bare minimum so that I'm always not feeling fluffy in that account. I'm not like, ooh, like we'll literally say like, oh, my account is sitting pretty or it's sitting fluffy.
Right.
Never want to feel that way, because that's when you like feel like you can go and treat yourself and blow the budget. Whereas if you keep that account hidden, and I think like something that's so easy to do is just have your savings come off the top of that. It's like a principle that like my mom definitely taught me, like when I got my first job, you know, off my paycheck, the savings comes out automatically. It was never your money. It always went to your savings.
Pay yourself first.
Pay yourself first.
Yeah.
Yeah. So continuing to keep that account as tight as possible works well for us. And I think that's kind of like what I've used as a budgeting tool.
It's kind of like a scare tactic to yourself. And to the point where like we have both even had the situations where we're just hanging out and it's like, I get a text from TD, your account is below recommended minimums. I'm like, oh shoot, I need to transfer some money because I'm just keeping it as like bare as possible.
Yeah. Like my mortgage on my investment property bounced, and my mom was a co-signer on that property, and she called me and was like, sweetie, is everything okay? And I was like, oh yeah, I just need to move some money around.
Right. So not recommended.
Not recommended if your mom is going to think that you're in some serious arrears. Sorry, mom. But yeah, it just helps me to feel like I don't have money to blow.
Exactly. Yes. We don't want to be sitting too far.
So that is all for today. Next week, we're going to talk about cutting some fluff and really fine-tuning the budget in different categories.
Some more tactical things that you can put into place today.
And things that we've both done, and I've encouraged other people in my life to do, to just cut the shit. We have way too many like hidden expenses in our life, and making sure that we can clean that up as much as possible.
Yes, sounds
That's
good.
all. See you next week.
See ya.